Hello and welcome. My name is Catie Hall. I'm a director in PwC's Governance Insight Center. And joining me today here in the studio is Carin Robinson, a fellow director in our group. And Carin, you and I today are going to dig into two of the governance team's big annual surveys. One, the annual corporate director survey, where we hear from over 700 public company directors, and the C-suite survey that we do in collaboration with the conference board, where we hear from over 600 public company executives. And let me tell you, they had a lot to say, both executives and directors. So let's get into it. Board refreshment and diversity. What did executives tell us?
Yeah, I think particularly with board refreshment, directors and executives are pretty well aligned. But 89% of executives want someone on their board replaced. 41% want two or more directors replaced.
Wow.
And I think surprisingly, 64% of executives do not trust their boards to remove underperforming directors. Now, what this tells us is that in management size, boards haven't made much progress in this area, Catie. I think the need for change in board composition is accelerating and it's becoming more evident. You think about new issues like ESG, climate, cyber, they've all moved front and center for business strategy. And I think as a result, management's just feeling the pressure to replace an older generation of board members than they did just a couple of years ago.
But the numbers are still surprising. So nearly half of directors told us that they thought a peer should be replaced. So that's one person sitting around, the boardroom table with them every single quarter felt one should be replaced. And then nearly 1 in 5 thought that 2 should be replaced. So clearly there's a disconnect here in terms of wanting both executives and directors wanting to see a director leave. But when we look at the data around typical refreshment limiting mechanisms like term limits, retirement age, assessments, directors generally aren't in favor or supportive of them. So clearly something needs to be done. And we'll talk about assessments later on. But for now, let's get back to diversity. What are execs talking about there?
So only 20% of executives think the board is diverse enough. But there is good news here. 60% of executives trust the board to prioritize board diversity.
Okay, that's a start. But why is progress to add diversity so slow?
Yeah, well, I think long tenured directors' reluctance to retire is still a top reason cited this year by executives for lack of board diversity. But I do think boards have made significant progress in this area, if you think particularly on something that they were barely acknowledging 5 or 7 years ago. This, to me, indicates that boards do have the capacity to adapt to this changing business environment. It just takes time.
Right. It takes time. And quite frankly, it takes action too. As I was just saying, a board assessment can be a first step towards making those changes. But if management doesn't think that the board is capable of looking at themselves in a candid way, or that the results aren't meaningful, then the changes that they do make or whatever comes out of that assessment process may not be as significant as management feels it should be.
No, you're exactly right, Catie. And another stat here, 60% do not trust their boards to effectively assess board performance. I mean, this really highlights an area of deficiency that we've known for a while. And I think it's interesting that executives are becoming so explicit about it. This might be as a result of the increasing scrutiny of executive performance during the last decade. If you think about particularly since the introduction of say on pay, it's as if executives are saying they think it's time for boards to undergo the same level of scrutiny.
So it's interesting because in terms of how the board feels about assessments, mixed results again. About a third told us that when we asked, what did you do as a result, or what changes did you make as a result of your assessment process? About a third told us they added additional board expertise. About a third told us they changed the composition of a committee. But only 12% decided to not renominate a director, and only 11% provided counsel to one or more board members. So when you think back to those stats around nearly half of directors wanting someone to leave, but only 11% providing counsel, another disconnect. That might be the word of the day here. Changing topics just a little bit. Directors in this year's survey did point out director engagement and directors overstepping their role into management sort of area as one of the reasons, or a couple of the reasons, why they felt that a peer should go. What are executives saying about those, director engagement with management and overstepping bounds?
Yeah, actually 82% of executives think that the collective board doesn't overstep the boundaries of their role. So that's nearly double what executives said in 2021. Traditionally, a challenge of boards is making sure not to overstep their role and get too far into the weeds. But I think this data suggests a possible pendulum swing as to the level of oversight and challenge by the board. And this could be due to the higher expectations, an increase in the volume of work in areas to oversee. I think executives may perceive this as boards pulling back, but in reality, they might just not have time. I think there's also a declining percentage of executives who think their board is spending a sufficient amount of time doing their job. So there was only 21% in 2022, and only 33% say the board asked probing questions. And if you think about this, during the COVID pandemic, there were naturally more board meetings, informal board conversations with management. And as things started to ease up, boards may have pulled back for that pre-pandemic role. And to management, they're just not spending enough time now. So also executives may just not know how much time the board's really spending on board activities.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that is really striking, the fact that so few executives think that boards are spending a sufficient amount of time in their role. I mean, I imagine there, as you said, could be a number of reasons for this. If you think about the complexity of topics these days, packed board agendas, additional board responsibilities. We're a director of events and we're talking to directors all the time. We know a top complaint is that there's just too much going on. So, it could be that they're overwhelmed with the amount of prep that has to be done and don't have as much time to ask those questions. So something to think about there, but boards are obviously feeling it and management's seeing it too.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, there's just more on the board's plate, and the bandwidth could very well be an issue. And this impacts directors' ability to serve on other boards as well. There was a big increase in executives thinking directors are overboarded. So 57% in 2022. And this is compared to only 7% of directors in 2022. And as you know, Catie, directors have a more conservative view on this. They don't think they're overboarded, but they do agree that having a policy for the number of boards that directors can serve on is important.
Yeah. I want to talk about another area that seemed to be a cause for concern or just something to sort of dig into or double click on. So boards continue to perform stronger in sort of the traditional areas like financial oversight, operational oversight. But when you look at things like even traditional areas of like corporate strategy, for instance, executives told us that the board's understanding has trended down since last year. So what's going on, Carin?
Yeah, Catie, I thought this was interesting too. And this could be because many business strategies are being revisited today. If you think about the economy and market deterioration, you think about the war on talent and digital transformation, all of these things, ESG, this might be why there's a higher percentage of executives that are questioning their director's ability to really understand the strategic implications and provide guidance on that moving forward.
Makes sense. I mean, more surprisingly, I think we keep digging into more surprising issues. Executives don't think that their boards understand key oversight areas at all. That went up in all key areas of oversight from 21 to 22.
Which is shocking, right?
It is.
And I think one particular area that stood out the most to me was 20% of executives don't think their boards understand executive compensation plans and incentives at all. And this is compared to only 6% in 2021. In particular, the percentage of general counsels questioning their directors' understanding of incentive planning doubled in a fairly short period of time. And this obviously coincides with a period where there's a growing number of companies that are embracing ESG-related incentives. So this, to me, indicates an area that the board may need to focus on.
Absolutely. And speaking of ESG, no conversation these days is complete without it. So it was clearly a big part of the annual corporate director survey. Directors had a lot to say about it. Was it as big a focus for the executive community?
No, that's a great question, Catie. And I think ESG is definitely a priority for both directors and executives. But I would say that executives and boards are pretty far apart on the attention that's being paid to ESG. 15% of directors say ESG doesn't get enough attention from their board, and that's compared to 71% of executives. And the views of the board's understanding on ESG also differs. If you look at the understanding of ESG risks, 82% of directors say that they understand ESG risks, but only 65% of executives think that.
Yeah, interesting. All right, final topic. What grade did executives give their board for readiness to tackle increasing cyber and privacy concerns?
You save the best for last.
Yes.
34% of executives think their board has poor cybersecurity data privacy expertise. And that's up from 23% in 2021. And then another 33% say it's just fair. And 50% think the board just doesn't understand cybersecurity and data privacy.
All right, Carin, thanks for joining me today. We've gone through a lot of different topics, a lot of insights, and I would just urge everyone, if you've heard something you like here, just be on the lookout for PwC C-Suite survey. It's coming out in April. Thank you.
Thank you, Catie.